So we're going to put Three Creeks under a bit of a microscope tonight and shine a light on some of the factors that have resulted in this panel being here. There are many different organizations, people, and groups of people who have put their minds to understanding and addressing the issues. Some of these people are here on the panel and many are not. Some others are in the room. I want to be really clear that I'm just going to talk about a very few aspects of the Three Creeks story here tonight so that the panelists can fill in their own perspectives without each one having to review the timeline and activities. This Three Creeks story is still unfolding, and we may be leaving you with a bit of a cliffhanger tonight because we just don't know yet how it's all going to unfold. So let me give you a bit of the story, and then the panelists will offer their insights. So the setting we have is the map showing. You'll see that on the map, Three Creeks is marked inside a blue box just to the left of the center, and it's northeast of Peace River. For the AER proceeding, the regulator considered Three Creeks as well as Seal Lake, Walrus, and Reno, and collectively they refer to these areas as the Peace River area. Oil resources in the Peace River area are considered heavy oil, and the primary technique used to extract this heavy oil is cold, heavy oil production, commonly known as CHOP. So next, the characters in the story. There are many people who have been connected to the activities in the area, and I first want to talk about the community. It was because the community members raised concerns that the regulator and others became involved. Residents worked together to look at emissions, as well as traffic, noise, and dust that many of you are familiar with as issues associated with development. And the residents are continuing to monitor the changes month to month and are watching to see the results of the changes being made by the companies. So next, the industry. There are 4 companies currently operating in the area. The companies have both field staff and head offices. Companies are working on their own, and they're also working together in several areas. The companies have formed an industry steering committee to guide the work of the operators in the area. Senior leaders from each company sit on that committee, and they meet monthly. The companies have also formed a best practices and traffic working group. Dave is the chair of this group, and he'll speak to that this evening. And there's an industry air quality group that is also in place, and they help to coordinate air monitoring and analysis efforts for the region. So the government and the Alberta Energy Regulator are also key players here. Various government departments continue to be involved. And again, there are staff in the field offices and the head office staff who all bring different skill sets and play different roles. Many of you have heard about the AER proceeding to examine odors and emissions in the area, and the recommendations from that are being implemented, and Deborah will talk more about that. And following the proceeding, the AER has increased its focus on compliance, and they will speak to that tonight as well. Changes have also been made to regulations related to venting and flaring. So those are some of the individual roles that the various players have taken on. And the community, industry, regulator, and the government have all had key roles in making changes together. And I want to just say a little bit about those parts as well. So in the early days, there was a Three Creeks working group with representatives from each sector, and that group worked to share and address concerns and to get the right people involved. The Hydrocarbon Emissions Response Committee considered the processes that were used to make and follow up on complaints. The multi-stakeholder air monitoring subcommittee is still in place and includes representatives from each sector. The group has provided advice to industry on the air monitoring in the area and helped to shape the terms of reference for 2 key studies. Reed is a member of that group, and he may say more about that, or you're welcome to speak to him about that. And of course, there have been countless open houses and meetings held in the area. So whether the people or the organizations have been working on their own or collectively, I think all would agree on a few things. It hasn't been perfect, and despite that, there is still change happening. There's been lots of learning along the way, all around the tables, and one thing I know for sure, when I look at all the players involved in Three Creeks, and these are the people in industry, in government, at the regulator, and in the community, everyone is doing the best they can. And they are still here, taking the next step and moving forward together. They may also share some frustration about the limits of what they can do, the pace of change, the uncertainty of how things will continue to evolve. So they're here tonight to share some of the learning and to give you some sense of the changes that are in progress. The story is not done, and I'll turn it over to them now to tell their chapter in it. So Reed gets the first word here tonight.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thanks for the introduction, Carla, and the invite to be your after-dinner agitator tonight. I've offered my professional perspective on issues confronting the residents in the Three Creeks area in order to protect the safety of the public and the workers involved in this industry and to improve our common future. I'm intimately familiar with industrial practice. I've practiced engineering for about 40 years across Canada, and the last 25 most specifically in Peace River. And it's my opinion that industry has promoted substandard products that reduce the safety of the CHOPS extraction process and ensure that in the early days waste was prevalent. So first of all, talking about CHOPS, cold, heavy oil production with sand. Although Deborah, in her remarks, promotes calling the process CHOP, that's not exactly true, and it distorts the real purpose of the industry producing sand out of the reservoir. Sand production is vital to the reservoir because both sand and oil are produced together. The removed sand creates a void around the entrance to the underground into the production pipe. And as that cavity increases, that increases the volume around the pipe, and it gets more production. So you start out, you drill the well, you get some production. As you produce more and more sand, that increases the production of the well. So when you ignore sand, like AER is talking about CHOP production, you're ignoring the sand, and that's a vital portion of the whole process of getting the oil out of the ground. And so that's just one comment. Now, for CHOPS is a process, and what you're doing is you're producing a number of fluids. You're producing oil, you're producing water, there's gas in there, and there's sand in there. Now, if you look at CHOPS production in other parts of the province, for example, if you go down to Lloydminster, what they're doing there is they're putting screw conveyors or various other devices to take the sand out of the tank before it starts building up. In the Peace River area, what we're doing is producing the sand into the tank until the tank fills up with sand, and then you have to shut it down and take out the sand. When you do that, it's cheap and inexpensive for industry. That's good, but you've also got huge amounts of emissions of these valuable, hazardous, toxic, and carcinogenic materials into the atmosphere. Personally, I promoted the idea of designing a process vessel for minimum cost emissions, maximum safety, and production to no avail. Now, Carla, we were supposed to get those.
Yeah, there's a video that was going to be shown here. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
yeah.
Please. So these, the video, when it shows up here, is part of the presentation at the proceedings, and this is various FLIR camera images of emissions coming off the tank. FLIR stands for forward-looking infrared camera. So it'll show up as hot stuff coming out of the tanks, if we can get it going there. So there's a cost associated with not applying best available commercial technology. That cost is in high emissions, irate and impacted residents, large increases in traffic, along with poor health, higher risk, and deaths, and a unique signature to the air in Peace River. We don't have the screen stuff yet, but
there it is. There it is.
So you've got the land descriptor there up on top. Industry's unofficial response to a safety-based review of this situation has been to threaten me personally with a review of my professional ethics with APEGA. My response actually was sustained laughter, because the truth is that the industry and the province, through its regulators, have been trading emissions and poor safety for low-cost, cheap production. With regards to best practices work, in my opinion, the best initiative that they took forward was to take their trucks off the road when school buses were picking up and delivering their invaluable cargo. Now, I've got something here I'd like to show you. These are nylon covers that you can put on top of the tank. They're lightweight, they float on top of the tank, they interlock, and they really reduce the amount of vapors coming off the top of the tank. And I'm not on commission with Greatario for showing you these, but he has bought me supper. One of the main reasons why the residents have been successful is the committed residents around and their unique perspectives on the situation developed through their life experiences. So here you can see a tank, and you can see the white vapor coming off the overflow tank. So this is gas being produced and vented directly to atmosphere. A great example of some of the committed residents that we've had live out on 842, who have spearheaded our response to the blanketing sicknesses most people have experienced from industrial exposure in their own homes. Page 2 is... they've faithfully recorded residents' physical symptoms and experiences for several years in and around the Three Creeks area. They've also been supporting a health-based response from the health ministry to assist our local physicians in effectively responding to residents' ailments. Now, one tip that the residents have followed, not really in line with Synergy Alberta model, is to not have a formal organization. We are few in numbers and with even less hair than normal, and we quickly decided that time spent on organizing a nonprofit organization would detract from solving the problems we are fighting. And we believe that working together with others will improve the situation. One of our members lives out on 842 and has his big spread out in the country with a big deck. In the summertime, he has friends or family over cavorting around, and he's out on his deck drinking beer. Guess what? The sewage system decides to pump out the overflow of heavy fluid load on the tank. The resident knows what's happening. You know, a two-person system quickly fills up with 30 people using it. However, and he knows it has an unpleasant odor, but it is harmless, and he can make a choice. He can turn off the lift pump and get rid of the odor, as long as he remembers to turn it back on later, of course, or tolerate the smell for a while. He is in charge, and he regulates the system. Contrast that situation to when industry decides, or conversely doesn't realize what is happening, and allows the process to upset, which dumps to atmosphere these valuable, hazardous, toxic, and carcinogenic materials to the atmosphere. The resident does not know what has happened. He is not aware of who is responsible, and there's no effective way for him to find out in a timely fashion. Now, at that time, the ERCB put together the Hydrocarbon Emission Resource Committee to deal with these issues. The ERCB has a blemished record in not being able to identify the source, reason, or timing of these emissions. I sat on that committee. However, the ERCB's terms of reference could not look outside the box that was constraining our behavior. So politicians are an integral part of our group. The residents have continued working with our provincial representatives on our view of the situation for the last several years. Hector Goudreau and Frank Oberle are intelligent, skilled, and effective at directing the bureaucracy inside Alberta. They were instrumental in getting the inquiry held in Peace River, and that inquiry supported the residents' demands for better understanding of how we got into this situation and what needs to be done now. I must also mention those who are no longer with us in our community. The Lebrecs of Reno have been forcibly evicted from their home by these industrial emissions. There is only one operator in that area, and that area, thankfully, or that operator is now supporting the permanent installation of an ambient air monitoring station in the area. This is not a resolution of the situation by any means, but hopefully the beginning of a better solution. We have seen marked improvements in the emissions in the area. And there's, of course, lots more to discuss if you want to buy me a drink later. Personally, I see my path forward as supporting our local Native communities so that they can benefit from the oil on their land. I see the Premier's first ever visit to Lubicon Lake Reserve as long overdue and a good step forward for our province. By respectfully treating our neighbors, we can resolve the past issues and be able to respond in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Reid. We've got Dave Hill up next.
You want to ask questions, or?
We'll do the questions at the end, I think.
Okay, very good. So yeah, my role in the process was as facilitator with the industry group, as Carla described it, and I'm here more of I guess as a reporter of sort of what we did and what happened. I'm not officially representing industry or any of the companies, but more or less, and I have their blessing to describe some of the work that we did as a committee. But I think before I even took on that role, and I heard that there was definitely things going on up in the Three Creeks, I took it upon myself to try and learn a little bit more about what was going on there. I had exposure to the Lloydminster situation in the McMurray sands up there, and I noticed a distinct difference between the production profiles up there than we see in the Three Creeks area. You made mention of sand, and the McMurray is exactly as you described, Reid, and that is where you have that full flush of sand, and you have the wormholes, and you get more production. And I noticed in the Three Creeks, the blue sky is a very different formation, and it has integrity. And in fact, so much so that when they drill these wells with all the horizontal, the multi-horizontal and laterals that they drill, which they didn't used to do in the Lloyd, they don't bother even running a liner in these wells. The rock has got the integrity that it flows, and you don't have anywhere near the sand volumes that you have to contend with up in the Lloyd area. So you have a different animal here altogether. And one observation that I've made even in my 30 years in the industry is that you really do see sort of, I don't know, maybe not flavors of the month, but you see things like sour gas production. Remember, we had a lot of emphasis on that at one time. Then we saw coal bed methane, which involved shallow drilling and many high-density wells. And we've seen sort of different as the search goes on for this stuff, you sort of see it's almost like the Charlie Brown pack style, where everybody goes for that new sort of resource, and they're going after it. And I saw this Peace River Arch as a similar one. Everybody's going in, and with everybody going in, I think there were some unanticipated things that happened. And one is that we had horizontal drilling. So that meant that we had way more production capacity in a per wellhead basis than we ever had in any of the other areas. And whether they were really ready for that, and whether there was industry capacity, but also regulatory capacity. You know, there was, when those other things, the coal bed methane and the sour gas stuff came along, the regulator had to adjust and make some new requirements and rules because they didn't have the capacity at the time, so they had to make it. And so, and the Three Creeks area, I think, is another one of these classic cases where everybody went after it. There was this way more gas than, even although it's low GOR gas or low gas oil ratio gas, the volume was so high that what do you do with this stuff? And because there was the regulatory void in you know, what do we do? Well, right now there's nothing on the books that says, and so your pictures that we saw there was actually legally happening really at the time. And so there wasn't a fault there, but really when anybody stands back and you look at those pictures, you think, geez, I think we can do better, right? And I think that's what we're seeing here happening as an evolutionary step that has occurred now. And I think I think you kind of referenced it, that maybe things are getting maybe a bit better now that the regulator has stepped in, and I don't want to steal their thunder. And in fact, in our best practice, when we were looking at the best practices, we had a couple of best practices that we had drafted, and yeah, that's where we go, and only for the regulator to steal our thunder and said, no, you got to do that anyways. And so, but in a way, it wasn't bad. It was saying we're on the right track. We're going to a higher standard here, and that's what the regulator has done too, and that's what the best practices committee did too. So what we did is we got the guys together in a room, and you know what was interesting in that process is that, in fact, a couple of comments said, you know what, we've never done this before. You know, whether it's because of Three Creeks and the flaring or venting issue, this is good that we even know a little bit about each other's operations. And in fact, what we did was do a field trip. And we went and visited all the different operators just to get an idea so we can talk the same language. So what do you do about, it was really interesting to hear the conversations over, what do you do about this situation? What's your compressor look like? What are your safeguards? What are your PSVs set at? What's your measurement issues and challenges? They were talking amongst each other. It's something they had never done before. So one of the positive outcomes that came out of the best practices is that these guys were talking. And in fact, even although we've done our best practices and they're in place, the concept from the steering committee was, we think you guys should just stay on as an operating committee so that when things arise and new issues come up, you deal with them and maybe talk about them and see if there's group solutions that you can come up with. As well as, like, one of the best practices was making sure each other knows when you're going to do your major maintenance and turnarounds, so that there can be an economy of scale. So you're not all chasing the same contractor for services, you know, and maybe your vacuum truck use for the sand issue. There are still fines that they have to deal with. You're quite right in the tanks, not as much as the Lloyd situation, but they nevertheless have to do that. And so what happened? We saw maybe some lazy practices happening, or just send out a vacuum truck. Well, a vacuum truck, I don't know if you know how they operate, but they circulate a lot of air volume through and will carry emissions out with them. Well, you know, maybe you just needed a regular tank truck. You didn't need the vacuum truck. And so there's a criteria that they've come up with to say, before you dispatch a vacuum truck, here's 6 questions you ought to ask. What's the nature of the work? Where's it going to be? Is there another option? A series of questions like that. So that's been in place. We've made it a best practice that all trucking will be through sealed units, right? And maybe they were going that way anyways. And so there's no vent. Say a typical water hauler will have a vent coming off the back. Well, none of the trucks will be able to truck with a vent. What other things? Truck loading procedures. And I know this is something the regulator is working on. We've come up with 3 different sort of scenarios that apply to each of the different companies that address a minimization of not only emissions but odors as well. But they're designed so that because every facility is plumbed a little bit differently. And so they're allowed for different options to address that. And so rather than one size, everybody has to do it. Well, let's do what makes sense for each company's operations. A fit for use kind of approach. And you know, the excess gas, you know, the effort is, you know, convert that into fuel gas, convert it into electricity before you do anything else with it. And so that's an emphasis as well that the best practices have. There's other issues like some of the traffic. We set up speed radar enforcement stuff, and we've actually reviewed some of that traffic data, and it's really interesting to see what's industry traffic versus what's civilian traffic, and sort of see where some of the anomalies are occurring, and sort of to feed that back into the operators. And each operator has agreed that when they contract a company to truck for them, that there's a series of, they have an agreement that goes above and beyond their normal contract. That this is how you're going to load. You have to do certain things. There's certain requirements, training requirements for the driver, reporting requirements, and I know certainly one or two of the companies have actually taken the step of pulling over a truck that's contracted to them and doing an inspection on it and tracking those inspection results. And I've suggested, and I think they're going to do this, but it hasn't been confirmed yet, but to sort of aggregate those results and report them through the county's website or whatever, so that people get a feeling. You're not out to call and to blame, but how are we doing generally in terms of compliance? And so there's a whole number of these things that have been put in place. Okay, and one initiative that we're still working on that the steering committee asked us to look into was, especially as there's going to be new expansion plans, so you see what Shell's doing. You know, they're saying, you know what, before contractors work for us, they're going to have a half-day training. And in that training, there's going to be an awareness of the best practices and the high regard for emissions in the Three Creeks area. Is it enforceable by law? No, at least not now. but it's something that the companies have said, no, this is valuable. We want our contractors to have to go through this basic training and an awareness of this sort of thing. But there's been other benefits. There's a pick up the garbage on the road sort of sharing of that every spring, excuse me. And then the 842 road, a new initiative there that's going to help. That companies have put not a small amount of money in to again ameliorate some of the concerns in the area. So that's some of the stuff that's going on, and absolutely. I think things can be done a lot better. That's my own opinion, but I also see that that's the direction that everybody's going. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. You can see everybody's trying to talk quickly to get their messages out, because there is so much more that could be said about Three Creeks. So, Deborah.
I'm filling in tonight for Carol Crowfoot, who had a death in her family. So I'll beg your indulgence, because she is the VP under whom the implementation of the recommendations from the proceeding are occurring. And I'm not as familiar with it as she is. So thank you, Reed, for Glenn. Reed. Glenn.
What's the last name?
Sorry, I think I caught whatever Iris had earlier with not being able to get her name straight. I apologize. But thank you for the explanation of CHOP and sand. And thank you, Dave, for the explanation of where the industry's at with that. So I won't go into that any further. I think you've probably had enough explanation about CHOPs. What I do want to do is to back up a little bit and talk to you about the proceeding itself and what that process looked like. I know that some of you in the audience may be thinking, you know, maybe this is a possibility in our community. So I want to just sort of tell you what that looks like, how the decisions were made, and why you need to maybe think twice about going down this road. At the time of the proceeding, the Peace River area had about 5% of the CHOP licensed wells in Alberta, and about 4% of the licensed single multi-well batteries in the province. But we had received 860 complaints about Odours from the Peace River area residents dating back to 2010. So clearly something needed to be done. So in response to those concerns, operational changes have been made, and Dave talked a little bit about these, and we've made enhancements to Directive 56 for the flaring and venting requirements as well. as a result of the proceeding. But on July 17th, the Chief Hearing Commissioner put forward a letter stating that, and you need to really understand this because what happened in Peace River was an inquiry, not a hearing. And the two are different in some very significant ways. So he described the inquiry as a public process by which all concerned local stakeholders could be afforded a formal opportunity to have their views and concerns considered by the regulator. And an ideal outcome would include potential recommendations for solutions, which may include regulatory changes, and would adequately address the concerns of the area residents and take into account potential economic, social, and environmental impacts of recommendations that might come out of the inquiry. So it began on January 21st, 2014, ran for 8 days, and on March 31st, the panel released their recommendations. Now, this is the part where things differ from a hearing. In a hearing, the panel has the legal right to make a decision about what will occur. And that decision can only be overturned by the Alberta Court of Appeal, and only in certain very limited circumstances. An inquiry is a completely different animal in that everybody who needs and wants to be heard is heard. The panel takes all of that and makes a series of recommendations to the regulator. In this case, the recommendations went to Jim Ellis, the CEO of the AER. And those recommendations were not binding on the AER, even though the hearing commissioners are part of the AER. But the fact of the matter is, Jim looked at them and said, we will accept all 20 of these recommendations, only 17 of which were actually within our jurisdiction. So, so that's the main difference with inquiries as opposed to hearings, is that it's just recommendations. But there were major themes that came out of it. And we've heard a lot about fugitive emissions and flaring and truck loading and unloading and monitoring and modeling, as well as stakeholder engagement and compliance activities. And Tina's going to talk about some of those more in a minute. The subject matter experts throughout the organization who are working on this, and there are 20 of them, they have been seconded from all over the organization to work on this full time because the AER believes it matters. And on Friday last week, October 31st, a number of reports were due from the Peace River operators. Gas conservation reports about how they were going to conserve gas. We're looking at those reports, and from those we will be setting timelines for gas conservation in the Peace River area. The same with flaring limits. Also were due on October 31st. And we're in the process of working with all the local stakeholders on a regional air monitoring program. And the framework for that will be presented to the Three Creeks subcommittee in November. So I apologize if you have more questions about this because, like I say, this is Carol's bucket of things. But I know I've got lots of knowledgeable people in the audience from the AER. But I'll give it over to Tina to tell you about what we've done on the ground since the proceeding ended.
Is my mic working? There it is. So thank you, and thank you Synergy Alberta for having AER speak to this today. Before I'm going to get into what we're doing, so we accepted the recommendations, now what? But before we do that, I don't know if we've talked enough about the incredible efforts that were done before the proceeding and actually the proceeding itself. And I thought about the theme of today, engaging solutions. So, I mean, it's an attractive solution, problem-solving design. In reality, it's really, really tough, and it involves a lot of effort and a lot of commitment, but it's the right thing to do because that's how you get the win-win solutions. These issues are complex. You're dealing with people, industries, agencies, that have different opinions, jurisdictional restraints, emotions, and lives outside of the issue itself. The residents in Three Creeks are very clear. The issue is not odors, it's emissions. They're also impacted by the things that come along with increased development: traffic, dust, noise, garbage. Once upon a time, they bought property, set up their homes in a quiet little place outside the town of Peace River. And they didn't ask for the development, but it happened, and it will continue. And those residents have been very committed, and they've been pushing for the regulatory change that was required to address the impacts from the oil in this particular part of the province, because we recognize it's different. Something I need to stress, and Carla talked about it, and Dave talked about it, and Deborah talked about it, the regulatory change is happening, but when it comes to implementing, we're very, very early in the stages of where we're going to go. Since the proceeding, we have a new Directive 60, and so this allows the AER to require additional capture requirements in specific areas of the province, so it's not necessarily the whole province. We can actually say, hey, this part of the province is different. We can require something different that makes sense there. We didn't have that before the proceeding. And it also allows us, with our first legislative tool, to enforce odors outside of H2S, because we didn't have that before. But we're not stopping there, because it's not the odors, and it's only offensive odors that we can enforce on. It's not the odors, it's the emissions. So we didn't stop at Directive 60, we're not stopping at Directive 60. So how are we going to address the emissions? We already have a requirement that gas capture is required in Three Creeks and Reno, and I should have asked to put the map back up. But when you look at the Peace oil sands area, they're quite small areas right now. Three Creeks and Reno already has gas capture requirements. And when those came into effect, we had compliance sweep teams out there, because we said it's one thing to put in a rule, but it's another to make sure it's happening. So we were out there, we were on the ground, and we published those reports on the website to say, this is how many sites we looked at, this is how many we were able to enforce on. And so we want to keep that. We also know that there will be new development, and there was actually some applications that were in process. And so the new requirement in our Directive 56, Energy Development Applications and Schedules, actually now has a requirement that requires any new heavy oil and bitumen operations in the Peace River area, they must capture and flare, incinerate, or conserve tank top gases. Still to come, so that's the new facilities to be built. That's Three Creeks, but what about the Walrus and Seal areas? So Deborah talked about we're requiring those reports to come with us. We talked about this being a complex issue. Equipment doesn't engineer, construct, create, and be installed overnight. And so we're trying to be realistic about our implementation timelines. And so those reports came into us October 31st. And now we have the responsibility, so there's not me, because I am not technical enough to do that, but we have a highly technical team looking at these reports. And we're going to have to decide whether we will accept the reports as submitted, or whether we're going to require additional conditions or tighten the timelines. And that decision is going to have to balance the needs of all parties. And once those plans are committed, we will use them as a compliance tool, and we'll be out in the field to verify that that's actually happening on the ground. You saw the footage of the tank top, well, that's venting. Now when we talk about fugitive emissions, we're talking about the leaks. And so there's a requirement, there's a team, and it's just getting momentum right now. It's together, they're working on their project charter, and it'll be looking at legislation or regulation around fugitive emissions, and so that the companies themselves will have to do some kind of monitoring and then submit reports or something to us. And so still to come. And then while we're working on the and then the truck loading and unloading, that project actually hasn't officially been fired up and going. There's some work on the ground with the best practices. We intend to leverage that work, and I imagine in our engagement plan work with the industry and the stakeholders to make sure we're considering all the views. But we're going there, and there's going to be some requirements around it. And while we're working on the operational requirements, our geology group is working to study the resource and figure out what's so unique about this oil itself so that we can better understand that and be responsible around that. A new air monitoring committee is being created, and so it's working with the existing multi-stakeholder air monitoring group because they were doing great work, and Reed's part of that. And the new committee will continue on that and take it further to meet the needs of the community. This committee, like many airsheds across Alberta, is an example of true collaboration, where the full decision-making authority lies in the hands of the multi-stakeholder group itself, not the AER. We did a little bit of consultation work around that, where community and municipal stakeholders were given an opportunity to provide written feedback on what they saw as a fair governance structure in their community, and so that formal feedback will be going to the committee as they move forward, formalizing their group. During the implementation, we're striving to be open and transparent. We've published a progress report each month. It's on our website, the banner on the top of the website. You got to kind of click on an arrow and it says Taking Action in Peace River. So a monthly report is published there, as well as there's a status update table of where we are in the latest on each of the project teams, some of which say project hasn't started yet, but we'll get there. We've also published air monitoring progress report and an evaluating stakeholder engagement report. We've held 2 resident meetings face-to-face. Alberta Health, or AHS, was a part of those meetings as well because they hold some of the recommendations. And we've stayed engaged with the existing Peace River working groups, and we also provided training opportunities for the local industry staff so they understood the new Directive 60 as it was rolling out and how we would be inspecting that and hoping that they could do inspections themselves, understanding our new requirements. We're seeking opportunities to involve stakeholders' inputs during decision-making processes. So there's some things where decisions are made for us already, and some of that was through the proceeding. But we're getting to the point where we can involve stakeholders' input to influence the decisions. So we're looking at those opportunities right now with these groups that are underway. And due to the petroleum resources around Peace River, we know that development will continue. We must ensure those previously engaged in the proceeding are engaged and informed as we move forward and implement the recommendations. But we have to continue to move forward. And successful collaborative planning starts with early engagement. So our next focus will be looking at that and moving forward and doing some planning around the future development that will be coming.
Okay, thanks, Tina. So thanks, Reed and Dave and Deborah and Tina very much. As you can see, there's more to tell in this Three Creeks story. I think we have a couple of facilitators who can help to take some questions. We've got somebody over here who, it's a question written down, it looks like. So this is a fairly lengthy question related to the visit to the Lubicon Lake First Nation community by the provincial government. And prior to Lubicon Lake establishing their community, they championed this area as part of their traditional lands, or they considered this area as part of their traditional lands. Has there been a lack of major consultation with this First Nation community on the development of this local resource, and is this community benefiting from the development?
I'm not sure I'm cognizant of what's actually happened and is planned for Lubicon Lake. I only mentioned that. That was the first time the Premier of Alberta was out to that community, and that's all I can offer there. Okay. Anyone else?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Reed. I think there was somebody else here.
Maybe just a question for Dave or Tina. Dave, you rattled off about 75 wonderful things that the committee's looking at for doing best management practices and things from from trucking and putting in processes and fit for purpose practices as well. And Tina, you mentioned progress reports. Are those one and the same kind of things that the general public can follow the status on to see where things are at and kind of leverage off of those learnings, and so that it's kind of publicly available, so that some issue in another part of the province, they can say, hey, let's go and have a look at what these guys already did, so that we're not always reinventing the wheel and and making the same mistakes over and over and over and over. I guess, short and sweet, is it publicly available so that the general public can follow the good progress on that status?
So I can answer a piece of it, and then Tina, you can. I just actually had a meeting with the steering committee, and they approved putting a summary of the best practices in an upcoming newsletter that will go onto the county site. So it won't actually necessarily be the formal document, but it'll be a description of each of the best practices. And if they want further information, there'll be a place they can get it. So yes, we're going to be. I think my caution is, though, that, I mean, these were developed because of the Three Creeks area, and to just take that and apply it somewhere else sort of willy-nilly or broad brush may not be smart. So with that caveat, yes, there could be some great learnings there, but it doesn't mean you just take it, well, they did that there, so it must fit here. So just with that caveat, I would say. But
I'll just point out, Dave referred to the county website, and that's the Northern Sunrise County website. And there is a section of that website that they have generously provided to the Three Creeks area. So all of the air studies that have been done, for example, and newsletters from industry are available on that website.
And our progress reports and status updates are just where the AER is towards implementing our regulatory change. So you won't necessarily get the best practices from there. You'll see the regulatory change unfolding with deadlines. But that's on the AER.ca website. Oh, and the results of the compliance sweeps are also posted there as well.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah?
Yes, I have a question. I don't know who could answer it, anybody if possible. If you did a spreadsheet that showed exactly what's in those emissions, all of the compounds, what makes that spreadsheet different than anywhere else in the province?
My understanding of the uniqueness of the Peace River oil sands is, number one, more reduced sulfur in the oil, and also a lot more aromatics in the oil than is normal in the province. So when I refer to aromatics, those are things that when you heat up the tank, these things are going to boil off. And if there's a leaked atmosphere, they're going to go to atmosphere. The damnedest thing then that happens is they cool off, they're heavier than air, they go down to the soils, and they're gonna be there depending on weather conditions and wind. So it's a unique resource, and the aromatics, I refer to it as BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene. These are nasty compounds. You absorb them through your skin. You can ingest them by breathing them, and the way the public health or the Shell's medical staff put it was, if you're a female of childbearing age, you don't want to be having a child and working here. I haven't seen the numbers. I believe that's pretty much correct.
I'll just add a little on that too, and part of the importance of the recommendation of the geology part of ours is that there's a study underway to look at that as well. And so they actually took samples from around the Peace River area and also from other parts of the province so that they could compare not only what it's like there, but what it's like other places. And so they are going to post that report once it's published on our AER.ca website. And they're also working on helping us in some plain language to understand what that means as well. So they're looking at a communication strategy, whether that's through a presentation or a video or something. But they feel our geology group, it's a task team as part of our AER team, they feel that's important that the people understand that too. So it's a priority of ours to do that.
Complicating the matter is that some of these operations are on thermal recovery. And when you start putting steam down into the reservoir, now you are generating the reduced sulfur compounds that Reid was talking about, the H2S. So you won't have one DNA doesn't fit all. It depends on what the process is that they're doing in the reservoir.
Is there one more question? I know it's getting late here, but is there one more question at the back there, Dave?
Carla, at the back of the bus, we got something to say.
Okay.
Yes, Reid, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the intimidations and that was going on with the residents and that they were expressing. I know you expressed a little bit about the intimidation you had there about your engineering license and that, but there was so many different things that residents really brought forward as by government and industry and workers that were influencing the residents' day-to-day livings.
Yeah, it's, thanks for the question, Doug. Not a pretty picture. One of our residents is, she's living alone. In particular, it seemed that she was singled out, that people were defecating in her driveway, parked in her driveway, putting garbage in there, things like that. Couple of instances of family members working in the industry told that, you complain about vapors or anything like this, you're going to lose your job. One of our Northern Sunrise counselors was offered the choice between being a counselor or joining or being part of the residents group, but not both. So these are some of the things that we've heard.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. And those are hard messages to hear. And, I think it's really why all of us are here in the room, so that those things don't have to happen, and so that we can find a better path forward working together. It's certainly been the theme of today in terms of how we can work toward powerful collaboration. So I just ask you to thank me again for these folks coming out tonight to talk about their work in Three Creeks.